Cressida prepared to harvest the corpse's spine by firing up his electric saw. It had been a simple job because the body was going to be cremated. He would have sawn off only the legs if there had been a funeral viewing. Taking off only the legs may appear to be a simple procedure, but there was a method to it. The legs must be sawed off precisely, just below the hip and just above the foot. Because whole bones were valuable, the femur and thigh bones were taken whole. The Achilles and other tendons were severed. The same is true for the skin. The body would then need to be sewn up. PVC plumbing pipes would be inserted in place of the leg bones, as is standard industry practice, to make the body appear complete when the legs are covered with clothing during the open casket wake. However, the body was to be taken straight to the crematorium and burned to ash. Cressida had free rein to harvest the body's usable parts, including the bones, membranes, veins, tendons, ligaments, corneas, cartilage, skin, and collagen, or the whole hog, as he called it. By the time he was done with it, the body was often just a disfigured, limbless torso. His co-worker was already bagging and labeling the tissue as it came off the body behind him. The skin would be placed in 16-inch jars. An entire body's skin would fit into 2 jars. The man grunted as he stuffed the bagged tissue into picnic coolers, each of which was already half full of ice. Cressida took a look at the half-eviscerated cadaver on the porcelain embalming table. He had spent 45 minutes extracting the bones. He may have to rush today. Another 5 bodies were waiting for him to be harvested. The bloodied scalpels, scissors, and mallets arrayed beside him gleamed in the room's bright overhead lights. Cressida began stripping the body for the rest of its parts, revving up his power tool. Cressida worked for Biomedical Tissue Services, a human tissue recovery company in New Jersey. He was the company's lead cutter, a certified tissue bank specialist. Any part of the body that is not an organ is referred to as tissue. The extraction of such body parts for reuse is known as tissue recovery. Like used cars, deceased human bodies can have their body parts transplanted and reused in other living human bodies. Almost every part of the human body can be recycled. Tendons can be used to repair torn ligaments in the knee. Blood vessels are used to replace damaged arteries in heart bypass surgeries. Congenital heart defects necessitate the use of heart valves. Bone can be used to rebuild jaws and spines, as well as to repair fractures. Cartilage can be used to rebuild faces. Collagen has the ability to smooth wrinkles and plump up lips. Skin has the ability to repair hernias and replace burned skin. Corneas can help restore vision. While buying and selling human tissue is illegal, the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 allows for tissue donation. After death, people can choose to donate their skin, bone, tendons, heart valves, and arteries. Many people are unaware that organ and tissue donations are handled differently. Organ donation in the United States is strictly regulated. All organ donation centers are non-profit organizations. In comparison, donated tissue regulations are far more lax, allowing many tissue banks to operate openly for profit. And it was a very profitable venture. A single corpse's tissue can be worth up to $80,000 in profit. It was a situation ripe for human tissue brokers to take advantage of. One such broker was Michael Mastromarino, the owner of Biomedical Tissue Services. Mastromarino recovered and sold human tissue to tissue banks. In turn, the tissue banks processed the tissue and resold it to hospitals, biotech companies, and plastic surgeons for transplant, research, medical education, and cosmetic surgery. Mastromarino hired Cressida and other cutters to go to funeral homes and harvest tissue from the recently deceased. It was a profitable venture. Cressida earned $185,000 per year. He estimated Mastromarino made up to $20,000 per body. The tibia, fibia, femur, humerus, radia, and ulna, leg and arm bones, sold for $5,000. Another $5,000 for the pelvis, tendons, and ligaments. Another $5,000 for the skin. "You're up to $20,000 for spines, veins, and valves," Cressida said. The acquisition costs of the bodies were low in comparison to the profit. Mastromarino had an agreement with funeral directors in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania under which he paid them $1,000 per body. But there was one thing that rendered Mastromarino's entire operation illegal. The bodies' consent papers were forged. Mastromarino's company had harvested from the bodies without the family's permission. Only one family had granted permission out of the 1,077 bodies they handled. The death certificates, consent papers, and medical history forms were all forged to give the impression that the bodies were donated voluntarily. Lee Cressida and Michael Mastromarino were modern-day body snatchers. Mastromarino's demise occurred in 2004. One of the funeral homes where his cutter team worked had been sold to new owners. On behalf of the new owners, an employee was dispatched to inspect the funeral home. He was taken aback when he discovered a bloodied and half-hacked corpse on the embalming table. Despite the previous owner's assurances that it was a normal organ donation, the employee was suspicious of the high number of organ donations performed in the funeral home. He had only seen a few organ donations at funeral homes in his 17 years of working in the undertaker business. However, this particular funeral home was doing a dozen funerals per month. "Boy, these people in Brooklyn are really generous," he told his wife later. Suspicious of the previous activities of the funeral home, the new owners called the police and turned over boxes of documents discovered in the funeral home. It prompted a 2-year investigation into Mastromarino's firm. The paper trail was followed by police investigators. They discovered that nearly all of the signatures on the medical paperwork were forged, as was the information. The police closed in on the leaders of the body parts theft ring after determining the scope of the fraud, which spanned 3 states. Mastromarino and 3 other men involved in body parts harvesting were charged with over 100 counts of grand larceny, forgery, and fraud in February 2006. The scandal spread from New Jersey to hospitals in Florida, Nebraska, and Texas, with thousands of people learning that they had received stolen skin and tendons. The case sparked even more outrage when it was revealed that Mastromarino had also harvested the bones of renowned journalist and broadcaster Alastair Cook. Heather Augustine, 42, had a neck surgery in 2005 to replace 2 discs with new bone. 3 months later, her doctor contacted her to inform her that her neck bone was most likely from a rogue source, possibly a very elderly person's cadaver. Augustine was startled and alarmed. "You think to yourself, I'm carrying a bone in my neck from someone who didn't want to be chopped up," she explained. "I'm completely taken aback. What should I do with these thoughts?" The desecration of their relatives' bodies shocked and devastated families. Dan O'Prea, a Navy officer, was told that Mastromarino's company had harvested his mother's body parts. O'Prea said he couldn't understand what had happened to his mother's body. His wife claims she has caught him staring into space on occasion. "It's straight out of a horror movie," he said. "You have no idea how anyone could do this." Susan Cook Kittredge, Alastair Cook's daughter, was shocked. Her father died at the age of 95. He was terrified of being cut open and had requested to be cremated. She had not consented to the harvesting of her father's body parts. She can't stop thinking about her father with his legs cut off. "I'm surprised at how upset I am," she admitted. "You wanted to remember your loved one in all of their glory. But I've had the image of his corpse pressed against my face for a month now. You have had your lives ripped apart, and I hope the perpetrators of these atrocities pay the price." But there was a bigger issue at hand, the threat of infection. Mastromarino had harvested indiscriminately from corpses infected with cancer and AIDS. He then sold the tissue for use in living people. Alastair Cook's body, which Mastromarino had looted, had died of lung cancer that had spread to his bones. Biomedical Tissue Services provided tissue to approximately 10,000 people, BTS. Betty Pfaff, 65, was one such transplant recipient. She developed severe infection, septic shock, and paralysis after receiving human tissue derived from BTS cadaver skin during surgery for abdominal hernias. There were other instances. A 74-year-old widow from Ohio contracted syphilis after receiving a BTS bone implant for lower back surgery. After the first BTS tendon she received failed, a woman from Colorado had to have another knee ligament operation. After receiving BTS bone implants for degenerative disc disease, a man tested positive for HIV and hepatitis C. Many other recipients of BTS tissue are still concerned that they may be harboring hidden diseases within their bodies. Michael Mastromarino pleaded guilty to enterprise corruption, reckless endangerment, body stealing, and other charges in June 2008. He was sentenced to between 18 and 54 years in prison. Cressida pleaded guilty to conspiracy, participation in a corrupt organization, abuse of a corpse, and 244 other theft and forgery charges. He was sentenced to prison for 8 to 24 years. Mastromarino developed liver cancer that metastasized to his bones while incarcerated, in an unusual turn of events. The irony was not lost on the families who had been affected by Mastromarino's blunder. Vito Bruno's father passed away from kidney cancer in 2003. Mastromarino later informed him that his father's body parts had been sold. He was suing both Mastromarino and the funeral home. "You don't want to wish anything bad on anyone," he said. He committed a heinous crime against a large number of people. Tens of thousands of people are affected. Irony has its way, Alastair Cook's daughter, Susan Cook Kittredge, said. "My father was diagnosed with lung cancer that had spread to his bones." Of course you're interested in cosmic irony. In July 2013, Mastromarino died in prison. He was 49 years old at the time. What are your thoughts on the body snatching case? I really appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Be a part of the Chris Crime Diaries family and hit the subscribe button now.